Welcome to another edition of Journeys of Hope. Today I have a really special guest with me, Tanya Lord. Yes, she is my wife, but she's also been a presenter and a guest on the Grief Cruise. So Tanya, maybe you could take a little moment and kind of introduce people to your grief story.
Well, the first time that I really experienced any kind of grief around a death was when my maternal grandfather died. I was 14 years old, and he was definitely one of my favorite people in the world. And his death was pretty overwhelming in terms of I had never been prepared for a funeral. I had never really thought about death before, and um, I remember my cousin, or my mom's cousin, holding my hand. And at 14, I was horribly embarrassed because my hand was sweating. And I kept trying to let go of him, and he kept holding on. And he leans down and he whispers, "Isn't the smell of flowers overwhelming?" And for a moment, I just felt so connected to him and so understood, and recognized that him holding my hand like he was really didn't matter, that my hand was sweating, and him just identifying how overwhelming that whole place was for me. And at 14, I was kind of left on my own. A lot of other people, my mom and grandmother and aunts and uncles, were grieving pretty heavily and very involved in the funeral, and I was sort of on the outskirts. So that was really my first real exposure to death of somebody that I love. And I wish I could say that that prepared me for the other losses in my life. But when my son Noah died now 20 years ago, and about 20 years after my grandfather, it was such a shock and such a I don't think anything could have prepared me for that. And a few years after, about 7 years after his death, my mother died. And I lost a real connection there to Noah, because she was the one relative who always remembered Noah's birthday and the day that he died, and how she just kept, the two of them were very connected. Their birthdays are near each other and their death days are in the same month. I thought I was pretty well prepared for whatever came next. But then Glenn's sister, my sister-in-law, and my father-in-law died within a week of each other. And they were really my family. I had known them for over 20 years. Heather, Glenn's sister, and I were sisters. She would introduce me as a sister, which always caused a little bit of embarrassment when she would say, "This is my brother Glenn," and his wife, my sister Tanya, just made me realize that every single death and everything single grief process is different. And I realized I could honor each of them and my experiences in different ways. And I stopped trying to categorize, this one was felt worse than the other one. This one was worse than this, and a child is worse than a mom. At different times, I miss my mom. Thanksgiving, when I'm trying to remember what she put in a recipe, it's my mom that I'm grieving. And when I want somebody to paint my nails and have silly girl talk, it's my sister Heather that I'm missing. And when I want advice from a father figure, it's Glenn's dad that I'm missing. So I realize now that the grief happens in different ways for each loss, and each of them are significant and important.
Wow, you've had a lot of different grief journeys and they've taken you in a lot of different directions. But as your husband, one of the things that I've noticed that you've done throughout most all of your grief journeys is you've turned to creativity, and you're a very creative person, and you've helped a lot in the formation of the grief toolbox, and you bring a lot of the creativity to the cruise. Can you talk a little bit about what creativity and grief means to you and what role it's played in your life?
The pain of the losses, I found my own creative voice. I realized that I had things I wanted to express, and they suddenly came out in poetry. And sometimes in minutes, I would sit down with a thought, and suddenly there would be a poem that came out. Very much felt like there was some other system at work, working through me. I've read some of those poems. I've written poems for the cruise. I've written poems for other grief events, and written poems really that speak to the pain of a griever's
But
heart.
let me ask you a question. If you remember back when I first talked to you about, you know what, Tanya, I think we should get involved with a grief cruise. What were some of the ideas that went through your head when you first heard about this concept of grief cruise?
Glenn and I have always been a couple that is willing to take risks and try new ideas, and we are always very supportive of each other. But I have to admit that when he came to me and said, I'm going to get involved with a grief cruise, I want to start working on a grief, bringing people together who are grieving on a cruise. Now, we've been on cruises before, and I could not fathom how that was going to go. And so I wanted to be the supportive wife, and I thought, okay, we'll just try it. Well, the first cruise I went on, I realized how amazing the venue was for a grief cruise. That I've been to a lot of conferences for the bereaved as a bereaved person, and often I felt trapped in a hotel conference rooms, and my only outlet was to take an Uber or a taxi or walk away from the hotel, but they weren't always near something, and if I did that I would miss several hours of the conference. And if I just needed a small break, I could go to my bedroom, the hotel room, but that didn't give me very much of a break. But on a cruise, you can walk away from the conference room and look at the ocean for 5 minutes and then go back. And the ocean itself is just so peaceful. Or you could go play bingo or get something quick to eat and within a few minutes be back in the room. And that kind of magic that happens with when bereaved people get together and share their loss and their hope and their struggles and their strengths, it was amazing. So I was a little chagrined that I had not been quite as supportive right from the beginning that I could have been. A grief cruise sounds like an oxymoron, but it's really a magical thing.
The joy and the pain, there's a safe environment for those two to coexist, and it really is a wonderful environment for that. Now, you've been on a couple of the grief cruises, and but if you were to kind of think back for a moment and think back to the different cruises you've been on, and if I were to ask you kind of what would it be that would have standed out most that you liked about the cruises that you've been on, or had the biggest impact on you? Either way, what would you say would be the answer to that?
People often think that I'm joking when I say I like to hang out with bereaved people. But the truth is, I really do. I love going to conferences where there are bereaved people. I like being part of groups of bereaved people. And on the cruise, there's a whole bunch of bereaved people. And what I like best about the cruise is being with them in this beautiful place with all kinds of different things to do. But most importantly, the connections that we make. So if I'm at a conference for bereaved parents, then I'm there for Noah. But on the grief cruise, I'm there for my grandfather. I can talk about Noah, my mom, Heather, my father-in-law. I can talk about everybody that I've lost. And everybody there is talking about all of their losses. So sometimes we have a primary loss, but the beauty of the cruise is that we can experience and we can honor all of our losses. And the when we did the ritual with hearts, where people were writing down names, there was like a beautiful energy in the room when they realized they could put down the names of friends that they had lost, relatives. It wasn't just the one grief event that kind of identified why they came on the cruise. I saw people open up to, I've lost a lot of
Yeah,
people.
that powerful healing, because most grief events are focusing on one specific kind of loss. But I do think there's a magic that occurs with just people being allowed to be people. But I do know that there's also a concern with some people when you mix all of those groups. Do people get lost? Is there a sense of feeling of that? And I know that one of your gifts is you have the ability to kind of, you're not necessarily the person that wants to be in the front and kind of leading the way, but you're kind of the person who sits in the back and kind of notices the people that are there. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what have you seen as far as how do people intermix together and how does this kind of gel? And what about the people that maybe are a little shy and don't kind of easily mix into the group? How does that work for them from your perspective?
People don't believe this about me, but I am naturally a very shy person. And so I like to look out for the people and a group dynamics. If there are people feeling left out or people unable to, not wanting to speak up. I think on the cruise, all of the presenters have always been very open to everybody. And so as I kind of sit in the back and observe how the group gels, it's I've never seen it um I've never seen where somebody feels left out and then stays left out. They tend to get paired up with somebody. Somebody notices them away from the group. Somebody steps up, and it's not always the presenters or those running the grief cruise, but the participants look out for each other because that's why they're there. They want to connect with others.
I think that's really true. It is an environment where everybody gets to connect. So let me ask you a question. So if someone who had never been on the cruise before and was questioning whether or not they should go on the cruise, obviously you've talked a lot of great things that, how your mind was changed and some of the wonderful events and things of that nature. But what would you just say to someone who was hesitant about going on the cruise?
Really natural to be worried about going and doing something for the first time. I've seen people come in couples or groups, friends come on the grief cruise, and I've seen a lot of people come alone. And so, whatever your circumstances are, coming on the cruise, it's one of the great things about it is there's already a group of people that you can connect with. I've seen just in the last couple of cruises lifelong friendships made. So if you're hesitant to come on the cruise, think that there's a cruise boat, so you can't miss out there. And every session you can pick and choose to come and not come. You can come and go as you please. And there's always somebody there to support you, to have fun with, to talk seriously about our losses, or just to talk silly about our losses. I love sharing stories with people and hearing other people's stories, stories that we don't always get to share. So take a chance and come with us.
And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would be the best way for them to do that?
If you want to read my poetry, you can look at the Grief Toolbox. You'll see a lot by Tanya Lord. Feel free to share that. It's there for the taking. And if you want to get in touch with me personally for any reason at all, I'd be happy to talk with you, or email would be the best. And that's tanyalord@comcast.net.
Thank you very much for sharing your hope and joy with everyone.